Hello friends! Today I'm going to be sharing with you a pen review, and I'm pretty excited about this one because these are some of my favorite brush pens to use for hand lettering. I haven't done an official list, but they're probably in my top 5 and I use them all the time on Instagram. And whenever I do, I get a lot of questions about them. So I thought that it was time for a formal review of the Winsor & Newton watercolor brush markers. So I first got these markers as singles a really long time ago. I don't exactly remember where I found them. I want to say Hobby Lobby, but I haven't really been able to find them since, so I'm not 100% sure. I do know that I found one at the store, I tried it, and I loved it, but I didn't buy this big set until recently because honestly, they're kind of expensive. But I finally decided to invest in them a couple months ago, and I'm so glad that I did. So let me get right into the review. As you can see, the outside of this pen is pretty large. I think this is good for people like me who have a really tight grip and even a heavy hand. Having a larger pen can help you to loosen up your grip a little bit, which is always good. It doesn't feel good for your hand if you're grasping your pen really tightly. So I like this because it makes me open up my hand a little bit and kind of loosen up that grip. This pen has two tips, the brush tip and the bullet tip. The brush tip cap doesn't stack onto the other end, just FYI, which is not a big deal at all, but even after all this time, I still try to put it on the other end when I'm writing. So there's definitely a chance that you will see me try on accident one of these days. And you also have to be careful of recapping this pen because there is an inner circle that could damage the tip of your pen if you slide it into the side and it gets caught on that little inner circle. Since I get this question a lot, I did want to show you a quick side-by-side comparison of these with the Ecoline brush pens. My Ecolines are getting kind of old and some have been well used, so that's why I haven't done a formal comparison. Some of the tips might be a little bit adjusted because those ones do slide in and out a bit. But I tried to find a color that I don't think I've used a lot to show you quickly what they look like in comparison to each other. And I do plan on purchasing another Ecoline pack so that I can give you kind of a even comparison with some brush pens that haven't been used a whole lot. And I also added in a Tombow in there so that you can kind of see the differences in size because I know that a lot of us have used and love or at least are familiar with the Tombow brush pens, and so those are a good comparison. And if you're not familiar with them, the Ecoline brush pen is the black one and the Tombow dual brush pen is the blue one. As I mentioned before, these pens are a bit of an investment compared to some more inexpensive brush pens. They are currently around $35 US on Amazon for a pack of 12, so that's just under $3 a pen, and honestly when you break it down for the price per pen, it still is pretty comparable to a lot of commonly used brush pens. It's just not the cheapest. So the downside to me is that there isn't, to my knowledge anyway, a place where you can buy like themed packs where you could get just the bright colors or just the pastels. So you are kind of at the mercy of their color choices in the 6 or 12 pack, which is great if you love the variety, but if you have a lot of colors that you may never use, it can be a waste of money to have to buy the whole pack. So the bullet tip of the Winsor & Newton is really great, and I do like to use it for monoline lettering, but I have found that it doesn't last super long and gets flattened out pretty easily, especially if you have a heavy hand like I do. So I wouldn't consider it to be something that you would buy the pen for. It's kind of like a bonus. If you do purchase it because of this side specifically, just be pretty careful with it. I think that the large brush tip is one of the big reasons why I love this pen so much. It's super flexible and pretty large, but it's also longer than some of the other brush pens in this size range. So you're going to get a lot of variation with your thick and thin strokes if you are able to kind of get your pressure down. So I'm just going to quickly swatch all of the colors for you that I have in this pack, and as you can see, they are really pretty and they're really pigmented. You get a little bit different of a look depending on the pigment that you're using. So you could obviously with these, you can add water and blend them out, and they're really beautiful, and they could be used to create some really beautiful watercolor art pieces. But for this video, I am just going to stick to lettering because, well, to be honest, I am not really very good at fine art painting, and I'm not really sure that it would be helpful for you even if I tried. So if that's what you're interested in, I'm hoping that the swatches will give you a good example of what they might look for you. But since this is a hand lettering channel, I am just going to stick to hand lettering for this video. And trust me, I think you probably prefer it that way. So I mentioned that one of my favorite things about these pens are the tips and flexibility. But another huge thing that I like is the pigment of these markers. Many of them are really bright and have really bold colors, but you can also kind of get that ombre effect where you get a darker color at the top and then it kind of gets lighter as you drag down your pen to the bottom of the letter. And I know a lot of people wonder how to achieve that effect. And I think honestly, it's a combination of a few things. I think it depends on the type of pen and it depends on the type of paper. And it also depends on if you're putting a lot of pressure on your pen when you're writing down, and then if you're gradually getting light with your pressure as you get to the bottom of the letter. So I've noticed that when I use a non-smooth paper, like regular copy paper, the color seems to soak more into the fibers of the page rather than really looking bold and vibrant. And that brings me to another question that I get often, and that's what kind of paper that I like to use. You might assume that you should use watercolor paper with these, considering that they are watercolor brush markers. But the thing is, when we're lettering with them, we're not really using them as watercolors. We just kind of like the pigment of the way the watercolor looks, but we're not actually typically trying to create like a watercolor art piece with this. So I still prefer to use a pretty smooth paper for lettering. As most of you already know if you've watched my videos, my favorite is HP Premium Choice LaserJet paper, but if you have another marker paper that you prefer, that's fine too. But if you do use a watercolor paper, just know that it might fray your pens quicker due to the rough texture, and the tips are pretty delicate, so you kind of want a smooth texture with your paper. And we definitely don't want to be ruining our brush pens when we pay $35 for a pack of brush pens. That being said, I did want to show you a way that you can use these brush pens to create a watercolor lettering look. First, we are just going to letter like normal, and then I will take my Aquash water brush that is just full of water and just pretty carefully add just a tiny bit of water to my lettering and then kind of move it around through the strokes of my words and my letters. By doing this, it just kind of gives the illusion of watercolor lettering even though I just wrote it out with a marker. And the next thing that I wanted to share with you is blending. There are a few different ways that you can blend different types of markers. I'm just going to show you the one today where you can write two different colors next to each other and kind of blend them together using the water from your water brush, or if you just use a paintbrush with water on it. And I will leave a link in the description box below for another video where I show some other blending techniques that might be fun to try with these as well. And I did want to mention that there is a difference between the Winsor & Newton watercolor brush marker versus just the Winsor & Newton brush marker. I know that the brush markers can be a little bit easier to find in stores, and they do look very similar to the watercolor brush markers. And so that can be really tempting. They also come in really pretty colors, but I just wanted to mention they are not the same. I believe they're an alcohol-based marker and the tips write very differently. When I have used the watercolor brush markers in the past, I often get comments from people that tell me that these aren't made for lettering. And to be honest, most of the products that I use were not actually created for lettering. So I know that can be confusing to people because I think sometimes people think I'm recommending the regular brush marker, and I'm definitely not. It has to be the watercolor brush marker, at least for the ones that I love. And whether or not they were actually made for lettering, they are still some of my favorites, along with a few other markers that probably weren't created for lettering either. So if you guys have followed me for a while, you know that I just like to try a lot of different markers, regardless of what their purpose was, and that's how I found some of my favorite lettering brush markers. And I also wanted to talk to you about durability and fraying. I know that occasionally I get comments from people saying that I'm pushing down on my pen too hard, and a lot of you are curious about either why or if that's okay. But to me, part of a good brush pen is that it can stand up to how hard I push down on it, because that pressure is what creates the thick and thin downstrokes that make brush lettering really unique. So if it doesn't hold up to a lot of pressure and then bounce back for a thin upstroke, then it's probably not a great pen for lettering to me. That doesn't mean it's a bad pen or a bad marker. Just specifically for my reviews, when I'm usually talking about hand lettering, I look for one that bounces back. But this one really does hold up. It is super flexible and it lets you push down really hard for a really thick downstroke, but then it bounces right back, at least in my experience, for that thin upstroke. Between the thick and thin lines and the vibrant colors, these pens can really help you to create lettering that stands out because it's just so pretty and bold. And as for the fraying, they are a brush pen and they are probably going to fray over time. That's kind of just the nature of the delicate brush pens, even if you're not pushing as hard as I am. So like always, I do recommend using a smooth paper that can help your brush pens last longer, but I have noticed a little bit of fraying with mine. That being said, I still use them even though there's a bit of fraying, and I'm not sure if that's just because of how thick the strokes are, but it doesn't bother me that much with these pens. I just don't find them to be quite as noticeable. I've had other brush pens that as soon as they get frayed, they become really hard to write with and nothing looks good, but I definitely don't feel that way about these. So in my opinion, that does make the fraying a little bit more tolerable. And here I just tried to show you a few spots where it kind of feathered out because of the fraying, but honestly it's really hard to see. So if you have it really large, maybe you can see a little bit, but like I said, it doesn't bother me as much as it does with some other brush pens. And I even tried to show it with my black marker, which is the one that I probably use most often, and it's still pretty hard to see, so that just gives you a little example. And I'm also not sure why I spelled color with a U. I usually do refer to it spelled that way because that's the way that it's spelled on the marker, so I just spell it accurately in case you're looking them up on Amazon or online or something like that. So yeah, that is why. But overall, I'm sure that you can tell that I love these markers, and even though they're expensive, I'll still probably try to keep them in my pen stash. If you are a beginner and don't want to invest that much in brush pens, don't worry at all. There's a ton of other great options, and I will post a link in the description box below for some of my favorite brush pens for beginners and for how to do hand lettering with just regular Crayola markers. If you have any questions or any other pens you'd like to see me review, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you'd like to see more videos throughout the week, little lettering videos and tips, you can follow me on Instagram at howtohandletter. I will see you in my next video, and thanks again for watching. Bye!